Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. All right, welcome to Trailhead. I hope you all enjoyed the keynote and the nice tasty lunch. We're here to dig into a practical guide to Git-based development. So hopefully at this stage, everybody is fully on board with what's happening to the ecosystem and the transition to Git. And we're here to give you what we recommend to our customers, how to actually start implementing this stuff for real. So my name's Kevin. I'm the CEO of a company called Gearset. We make DevOps tooling for Salesforce, help people bridge the gap between their traditional development models and adopting SFDX, and just moving the entire team onto source control, as well as helping teams streamline more traditional development flows as well. So here to talk about how we actually implement Git, and I'll do a very quick primer on what version control actually is at its most basic, because sometimes people get a little bit intimidated by some of the jargon that gets thrown around. Version control is ultimately just a way to track changes to text files. Ultimately that's what it is. So if you can represent your data, represent the thing that you care about as a simple to read, preferably human readable text file, then a version control system is a brilliant way to capture thoughtful points in time when you change that file. Why you might want to do this, as I said, you're capturing thoughtful points in time as you change these files, so you can then get feedback from your team, feedback from your peers, make sure that what you're doing is correct. You back everything up in a central location so that you can experiment, you can iterate, you can make mistakes, and you're still going to be able to get easily back to where you were. And although I said it's important to have the files be simple and human readable, once you actually get them into the version control system, they're machine readable as well, and now you can build complex deployment flows on top of them. So that's sort of version control in an absolute nutshell. Some of the benefits, you get the single source of truth. You've probably heard this mantra lots now from different talks, and it's this shift away from treating your org as the place that you care about, and you start to consider the version control files as what you think of as your org. So if you want to know, what should your profiles be set to, what should this field formula be, you do all of that by looking at the source control system. That's the thing you care about, and not the org. The orgs become what Salesforce refer to as ephemeral. You can get parallel development streams and do that safely. So there's lots of ways to do parallel development, but version control systems have been honed over the last 30 years to make that the best way to do it. Once you start doing parallel development streams, you're almost certainly going to get code conflicts. And again, version control systems, they were designed from the ground up to support that kind of workflow. You get an audit trail of who did what, where, when, and why. So because they're thoughtful snapshots in time, the person that did it is saying also why they did it, so you can capture the business requirement. Because everything's coming from the source control system, you can do it consistently, you can do it repeatedly, because it's always going to be the same thing. Simplify rollback, and ultimately just the whole reason you do any of this is to release faster and more reliably. That's the reason for the shift. So this is the classic flow that we find a lot of our customers do today when they come to us. They've got a developer sandbox per developer or per admin. They use something they do all their changes there, do their experimentation there, get their user story completed, and then they use something like change sets or something like Gearset, move those changes into an integration or staging environment, and then move it from there through org to org until you eventually make production. And this is fine up until a point, but you do start to hit scaling issues. And what source control says is you sort of flip all of this on its head, and instead you treat source control as the absolute version of truth. So when I come to do my work, when I come to do some actual changes, I can start off in the source control system in what's referred to as the master branch, and we'll dig into that later. Because I know that those files are the absolute truth of what I'm supposed to be working from, I can create a feature branch off that, do my experimentation in my sandbox as I normally do, use commits to capture changes, so no matter what experimentation I do or what mistakes I make along the way, I'll always be able to do small version commits with messages that captured my intent. Eventually, once I've worked out what I'm doing and Googled enough, I'll have my branch ready to go, and I'll merge that back, probably using my source control tools to open a pull request. That's the kind of flow that we're moving towards. So given that source control systems have been around for a very long time, why have we not always used source control and version control for Salesforce projects? The biggest problem is really coming back to that requirement to have simple human readable files. So the Salesforce metadata, when you change something in Process Builder, like what that actually changes under the hood is quite a lot, and it's traditionally hasn't been that human readable. So that comes really down to the tooling limitations around how you could get things out of Salesforce and back into Salesforce, how you could get that text representation and move those text files around. So there's that limitation. Technical barrier of command line tools. So the way that you normally interact with source control systems is via something like you see before you. That is fine if you're comfortable in the shell, and there's a whole bunch of users that are, but there's also a whole group of people that this is intimidating to, and the learning curve there is quite high. But probably the biggest one is not really knowing what good looks like. So you can ask 10 people how to set this up, and you'll probably get 10 different answers. So that's probably the biggest hurdle that we have come across, and that's what we try to provide a model that people can follow and then deviate from as they need to. Getting set up with version control these days is super easy. There's a whole bunch of version control providers. The one you should choose, unless you know enough not to, is choose Git. It works really, really well. It works really well for Salesforce metadata. A few of the others, like Perforce, work slightly better in if you've got lots of binary assets and things. But at this stage, Git is just a perfectly sensible option. You need a Git provider then. So the three big ones are GitHub, Bitbucket from Atlassian, and GitLab. Again, sort of choose any of these. They're all sensible. I personally use GitHub because I quite like it, but they all do more or less the same thing. A big one that people often struggle with is swap metadata to version control. So the thing that we promote is that not everything should go on Git. And it's much easier to start with a subset, to start with something small, than it is to try and roll back later. So we say get it going well with a nice simple model with not too many things, and then layer in stuff later. So we say basically you want the schema, so all of your custom objects. You want all of the programmability, Apex classes, all that sort of stuff. And the big one that people often forget about, because it's quite difficult, is profiles and permission sets. But they're key, right? They control all of the security of who has access to which parts of your org. So we think they absolutely should be source controlled as well. It doesn't help that they're the most difficult. They're really, really complex. They don't version control easily, but getting a good process in place to capture that change is sort of a prerequisite, we would say, for our customers. The model that we follow is broadly Git Flow. It's, again, the sort of, if you have a reason to deviate from this, then awesome, but most people don't. You have everybody work in separate developer sandboxes or Scratch orgs now. Use feature branches to have totally isolated changes, and then later move those back through a PR workflow, so through your source control system. The key thing that we try to stress is those feature branches should be really short-lived. So we sort of espouse simplicity in all of this. We sometimes speak to customers that have multiple repositories or a repository per sandbox. We'd sort of say, you probably shouldn't do that unless there's some really good reason you need to. And we'll also have customers come up with quite complicated branching strategies where each of the developers working sprint branches, then go to like a develop branch, then go to a release branch, then go to a master branch. And there's some customers that absolutely make sense, right? When you get to 60 or 100 people, yeah, maybe you need that level of complexity. But for most teams, if you're 20 or under, you really just ideally keep a master branch with feature branches off it. And then that master branch becomes the source of truth. So when we merge in our PR, that goes into our feature branch, into our master branch. From there, CI will automatically deploy that out to an integration environment. Once we're happy with that, we've done our testing, we'll go to a UAT environment for our users so that they get to sign off. And then we're going to go to our production environment. And you'll notice that this diagram is flipped around from earlier where we were going from org to org to org. There was a chain of things. Now we just get it into master. And from there, we're always deploying that same release, that same thing goes to each of the different environments. So you don't have to do the retesting again and again. The other thing that we advise is to find a deployment tool that works for the whole team. So I'm going to demo Gearset in a second because that's what we're building. But I do think this is genuinely good advice for no matter what you choose. Make sure that your developers, admins, and release managers are all singing from the same hymn book, that everybody can be involved. We see some teams that adopt very CLI-heavy workflows, and then their admin team, they don't get to take part in that. So when they're making those changes, it's outside the model, it's outside the process. The really important thing is to make sure that it works for the entire team. So I'll jump over to my demo of Gearset. To get started with Gearset, you just go to gearset.com. So we offer a totally free 30-day trial. You don't need to contact us. You can use it for real on your real orgs or spin up a couple of dev orgs if you want to try that out first to verify it. But you don't have to, we won't hold your hand through the trial. To get started, you just press get started. That will log you over to our app where you can log in with your Salesforce creds or your Google creds. At this point, you're just creating a profile with us. You're not actually getting access to, we're not getting access to your org. Now we're in Gearset, we can set up our first comparison. So I've got 7 minutes left, and Gearset does a lot of stuff at this point. So the stuff that I'm not going to show is things like continuous integration, monitoring, or data deployment. All of that I'm going to leave for another day. The thing that I'm going to show now is how to compare between two sources of metadata. With Gearset, you can do an org to an org. So that's sort of the classic change sets flow. If your team just need a better change sets, then you can start off here. Then you can start to migrate things towards source control. And what's key for Gearset is that we expose all of this through the same UI. So no matter what permutation of this you're choosing, if it's org to source control, it's all the same UI. So I'm getting real short on time. So what I'm going to do is move a change from a repository into a newly created Scratch org, just because we're here at Trailhead. But the workflow is the same if you were using sort of standard org types as well. So the repository I'm going to use is this Dreamhouse repo. I'm then going to create a new Scratch org. And behind the scenes, we're going to use the same APIs that Salesforce used for the SFDX CLI. We're going to create that Scratch org and get it ready to make the comparison into. The repository is the Dreamhouse app that is using all the samples. You can configure what you want to compare, how you want to compare. The defaults are pretty sensible, but I've actually got a save filter as well, which I'm going to use. Kick off the comparison. What's happening behind the scenes now is Gearset is going to connect out to the source the source repository. It's actually going to do a Git clone behind the scenes. Again, you don't need to know any of this, and this is like, very approachable for everybody on your team, regardless of comfort with the CLI. The target then, we're going to use the metadata API to that Scratch org. We're going to retrieve anything that's in there, and then show you all of the deltas, show you all of the diffs. Key thing that Gearset's doing here is it's not going to do just a text diff. So for both source control and for the org, Gearset's going to parse all of the metadata. It's going to build up an understanding of it, and that allows us to do things like dependency analysis, make it easy to move profiles around. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Now the comparison is finished. Because I just want to move everything from my repository, I'm just going to grab all of the changed items, all of the new items, press next. Before we move anything to the org, we're going to check it. We're going to check for any missing dependencies. There shouldn't be any because this repository is valid. Our CI build would have been picking up if there was something going wrong. But we're still going to check, and that's even more important if you're going to the source control system, because Git doesn't care. It's just going to accept those files. So it's important to make sure that you've always got all the dependencies. Now, Gearset has actually picked up some things. So and every time you do a comparison or any time the CI build runs, we're running PMD for you behind the scenes, some static code analysis. So there's a bunch of violations that have been triggered in that Dreamhouse app. So we could fix that up over time. We're going to ignore it for now because it's written by Salesforce and I assume they know what they're doing. I can now build that final deployment package, go ahead and do the deployment. At this point, I could schedule it for later. So if I've got a use case where I want to prepare it on a Friday or something, but have it go out of hours, I can do all of that. You can set this up to be as complex as you want, but for the purpose of the demo, we'll just race through and get the deployment done. So Salesforce is going to process that using the same APIs that chain sets built on, the IDEs built on, and the SFDX CLI is built on as well. Thankfully, there's no tests to wait for in this one, so it should be pretty speedy. Cool, so that's finished. So Gearset's going to tell us what we've done. We can grab the deployment report if we want to, and that's all tracked in deployment history alongside the ability to roll it back if I've made any mistakes or anything. So the final thing that I'm going to try and show you super quick is what happens if you go the other way. So I'm going to log into my Scratch org and make a change. Nope. So I'm going to bounce over to the object manager. I'm going to find this broker and add some new fields to it. Auto number. Cool, so I've now made a change in my Scratch org. I'll set the profiles and permissions. Cool, save all of that. And we're definitely going to run out of time. But if I want to push that change and share it back with my colleagues, instead of using a change set to move from that org, instead what I'd do is I'd pick the repository and go the other way. So I'll be able to see what I've changed. So I'd just add the field. It was pretty simple. But if I've added lots of things or if I've made loads of changes to profiles, Gearset will show me all of those diffs and allow me to make just the granular selection that I need to move them back to GitHub. And I can do everything I need to from here, creating the feature branch, whatever it is. Makes it very, very approachable to anyone on your team that's just getting version control for the first time. This is a really compressed version of a longer talk that I give. If you want to find out more, then we're over in the corner there beside the breakout sessions. Come and speak to us. Or if you go to gearset.com/resources, we've got a white paper which talks a little bit about Gearset, but does talk a lot more about how to structure your teams, how to structure your repositories, like a quite practical guide to adopting version control. The thing I'd say is that you should be looking towards version control now. It's good for everybody, but if you've got more than 5 people in your team, you'll start to see some real benefits early on. The thing we always encourage is to start simple, so it can be really tempting to start with complex flows, but just start simple, get that working, and then move across. Find a deployment tool that enables everybody on your team to work together, no matter what the process is. It only works if everyone's bought in and everyone's involved. And I think if you do this, if you actually move towards using Git and version control, you'll release faster and release more reliably. Cool. Thank you very much, everybody.